Talk with Mitch Lafon.
We are speaking with Frank Musker, British songwriter and composer, having worked with some of the greatest, including Brian May of Queen, Sheena Easton, The Babies, and many more. As we say in Montreal, bonjour, monsieur, how are you?
Extremely well. Très, très bon.
Très, très bien, yes. Now, here's this exciting thing. Today, as we're recording it, is actually Steve Stevens' birthday from Billy Idol, and your band, World Goes Round, worked with Tommy Vicari, who, of course, has worked with Prince and Billy Idol. Talk to me about this album, World Goes Round, because it was recorded back in 1989, or as I like to call it, the golden age of rock music.
Golden age, yeah.
The golden age.
It was a very momentous time. We were kind of... Well, I was living the songwriter's dream, living in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles with a lovely house with a great big sort of sequoia growing out of the middle of it around the recording studio. And we got to know each other, the four of us, through the process of writing together and working with different people. We were all doing different stuff. Elizabeth and Marty were working with John Denver and Linda Ronstadt. I'd been writing and working with Quincy Jones and Arif Mardin, people like that. And anyway, we sort of came together through the writing, really, because that's how I met Jeff. Somebody came along to my studio, which I used to let people, use when we weren't using it ourselves. And Jeff came along, and I was listening in the other room, and I thought, this guy's good. I think we need to kind of, pull him into our orbit, So we became good friends, and it's a nice thing because they were colleagues and work colleagues, but they were also great friends. And the lovely thing is, 30 years later, there's a real kind of bond and friendship there. I mean, the album never came out. That was the weirdest thing. It kind of got put in a drawer and forgotten about because we were all so busy, and we didn't really have the kind of impetus of a working live band. We never did any live gigs. It was very studio orientated, and I don't know. One thing led to another, and it just kind of the energy just dissipated. But then last year I was in India with my wife traveling, and I got an email from Marty, the guitar player, Marty Walsh, and he said, listen to this, there were a couple of tracks on there. And I thought, boy, these sound really good, and I literally hadn't heard them for 30 years, So it's like a time capsule, then he sent me the other tracks, and I said, God, these sound amazing. So he sent them to Tommy, and Tommy said, well, crikey, let's master these, So he mastered these tracks from the cassette. That's how good Tommy's sound is. So that's another unique thing about this album. It's mastered from cassette. Audio
wow. Mastered from audio cassette. So talk to me a little bit about that time, because you're working with all these great artists. Mm-hmm. What sort of gave you the impetus to say, okay, let's create a band and let's put our songs to our use rather than to, talk to me about writing for yourself and also writing for others?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because we were all kind of pro songwriters, really. And so when you're writing, particularly in that pool in LA, it's very competitive, and it's a lot of decisions are made kind of by committee. It's like people go, yeah, I love the song, and then it gets to the next stage, and someone goes, nah, I don't feel it. And we were kind of fed up, all of us, with having great songs that didn't quite get there. Other great songs that have made it, but they weren't necessarily our best songs. And I think it happened very organically. Elizabeth and I had been in a relationship for a few years, and so we were sharing the studio. And when Elizabeth came across Marty first through working with John Denver, she'd been touring with John and recording with him. And Marty had been working with Supertramp and as their kind of main guitar player. So anyway, I got my old 1989 diary out, but I can't exactly find the moment where we decided to make a band. But I think the point was that we really wanted to just make some music that felt lyrically and musically like it was us, because I think writing to order is fine. And listen, it's my bread and butter, writing for other people. I've made a career out of doing that. But there's always been a bit of a frustration from an artistic point of view, because I've always been very envious of the creative freedom that artists have. They can write from their soul and, write about strange things and, more difficult things. I mean, if you try to write a song about the destruction of the rainforest and stuff and get it recorded by mainstream artists, you're sort of on a hiding to nothing, really. So within the context of the band, I think we all felt that we could be very commercial and appealing, but at the same time, deal with lyrical subjects which were a bit more kind of personal and a bit more kind of, which had a bit more personality. And that's really what we were looking for. You know, I think the classic hit record written for someone else has a wonderful universality, but it doesn't have that personality unless the artist makes it that. Like, I mean, Freddie Mercury's version of Too Much Love Will Kill You, he just, to me, that's probably the best cover we've ever had. You know, he made that song so personal and made it his own. But that's a rare occurrence, to be honest, to be absolutely honest. As a sort of working songwriter, that's a rare thing. I would say 90% of the hits that I've ever had, when I first heard them, they were a disappointment. They didn't sound as good as the demo for me.
Really? Okay. So then, okay, that's an interesting point that I want to take up on. But as a songwriter, because I've interviewed a lot of them, Desmond Child, Holly Knight, and so on and so forth. Jim Valance, one of my favorite people in the world. What makes a great song for you when an artist comes to you, or a record label comes to you, or a manager says, okay, my guy needs a song? Do you listen to their previous catalog and say, okay, I sort of get it, I'm going to write them this? Do you just pick something in the file and go, well, okay, this should work for this? How do you sort of approach songwriting and writing for a client, for the lack of a better word?
Well, I think writing for people is an interesting art in itself, because it's a bit like being a scriptwriter and writing for an actor. You know, you have to kind of in some way assume their personality while you're writing in order to create that fiction that's going to work for them. You know, but very often songs will be recorded by the last person you expected. And I remember a terrible story of writing a song for Air Supply. Well, it wasn't for Air Supply. We wrote a song for Billy Ocean, which my old songwriting partner, Dominic Bugatti, and we wrote and produced a song called Every Woman in the World, which was a kind of, we had conceived it as a kind of Teddy Pendergrass kind of soul ballad, you know, with Billy Ocean and his fantastic voice, you know, and that version came out in a film. And Clive Davis, bless him, sent us a cassette of this new version by a band I'd never heard of. And I was really upset because it was so kind of white bread and so exactly the opposite of what we had sort of intended when we wrote it, that I even had the temerity to send a telegram to Clive saying, you know, I don't think this is a hit. Please don't release it. So when it was sitting at number 3 in the Billboard chart, I kind of felt a bit stupid and had to kind of go back and say, actually, I've really learned to love it now. Because it's funny, it's become a sort of signature tune for them, and yet it was not really conceived that way. And of course now, in retrospect, I listen to it and I go, yeah, it's a great record for, you know, within their world, within their sound, within their audience. It's a brilliant record. But it wasn't the record that I had conceived in my head. So that just shows you the power of songs. You know, they can be reinterpreted different ways, and you know, an artist will hear something in a song that you never expected at all. And you know, there are those wonderful kind of serendipitous moments when an artist just gets it and takes it somewhere else. I mean, I for example, I never knew that To Make You Feel My Love was a Bob Dylan song. I had no idea. And then suddenly someone said, by the way, that song is by Bob Dylan. I mean, it's been covered so many times by so many people, you know, and it's the last person in the world. If I was in a sort of trivia quiz and they said, who wrote that song, I would never have guessed Bob Dylan, you know. But it's a great song, you know.
It's amazing how, you know, they talk about how the art, you know, anyway. Let me ask you quickly about songwriting, because back in the day, if you had a song, you know, you have Brian May or Queen covering your song, you're set for life and everybody's happy. When I was talking to Desmond Child, he said, listen, I've got 6 billion streams on Spotify and I got a check for $3,000.
Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, it really is a mess. I'm afraid I have to lay this at the record company's door, because when the internet was being created, we flagged this up. I was doing some pro bono work for the Academy in England, Songwriters Academy, and we could see this coming. You know, by sort of around the mid '80s, we could see that you know, with Napster and all of these things coming along, which now seem so antiquated, but at the time they were like the devil, because they were just driving a coach and horses through copyright, you know. And if people could start taking songs for nothing, that meant, well, how do you make a living? Is there going to be a music business? And we flagged it up many, many times, you know, to government and stuff like that. It either just went completely over their head, they didn't understand the issue, or there was not a lot of public sympathy because they all thought all rock stars were kind of rich wastrels. And, you know, if you were Elton John, so what? Who cares if you don't make any money from a record? You got so much money anyway, without realizing that there is this pyramid that goes down, well under an iceberg rather, that goes well down under the ocean line, of lots and lots of people who just make a small amount of money, who are essential to the music business, who've now sort of disappeared, So it's become even more of a feast and famine business than it was. If you're Beyonce, that's terrific. You can monetize everything you do. If you're, I don't know, if you're Kanye West or whatever. But if you're a non-performing songwriter, which, I mean, I still thought of myself as an artist, and I still do. But in those days, the thing that was becoming successful for me was writing for other people. So you just do that, John Lennon said, well, life's what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So I was going with this, but it's a sadness, because the record companies really could have set out the ground rules for the game, and they just didn't. They thought it would go away. And that was from a real lack of real music people running. I mean, this was an absolute peak time of corporate mergers and lawyers and accountants running record companies. And they just, I mean, overnight, the back catalog disappeared. And that was 70% of their income.
Well, so, and I'll add, perhaps incorrectly, but I'm going to add, I think there was also an arrogance from the record companies where they just thought, oh, we're too big. Nothing's going to happen. We can do whatever we want.
I totally agree. It's massive, and I still don't forgive them, because basically, I mean, I'm very lucky, because I have a catalog full of well-known copyrights. But what they've done is they've made it so difficult now for young writers to come through, and it's almost impossible for non-performing songwriters to make a living, because these days, you get a song like Uptown Funk, and there are 9 writers credited on the song. The guy who did the beats, the guy who did this, the guy who did that, then the people who sued them because they did Uptown Funk You Up and all of that stuff. I mean, that's not the music business that I know. I belong to a songwriter society in England with some of the great writers. Tim Rice, Don Black, Graham Gouldman, all these people, fantastic sort of old school songwriters who would never have become what they are if it weren't for the fact that they had this relationship with their publishers and that they could write, for other people.
Yeah.
So it's different now. The music business has changed. I think a lot of the craft has kind of gone out of it. I think a lot of records are now being made, and also it was like a perfect storm, because there's also the advent of the video. People talk about a great song and they actually mean a great video when they say, oh, that's such a great song, but they're really talking about the video. So it's there's no use complaining. It's become a kind of multimedia thing, a song now, But a pure song like River Deep Mountain High, or one of those, You've Lost That Love and Feeling, or those great songs that came out of the so-called golden age of writing, they were all craftsmen. There was the Brill Building in New York. You'd walk into that building, and in cubicles you'd have Carole King, you'd have Neil Sedaka, you'd have Mike Stoller and Jerry Lieber. You'd have Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. I mean, all these people, all these massive names in the songwriting business, they don't exist anymore. Those people now they're legendary because of what they've created. But you also have to create fertile ground in order to have that kind of thing happen.
You do.
And publishing is always the last. It's the one that everybody wants to skim off and have a piece of, because that's the enduring copyright. The copyright which, I mean, who knew that 40 years, 30 years after I'd written songs, they would still be earning money? I had no idea that, when I was young, that was the case. But I think it is a shame that we've lost that kind of craftsmanship from this. I mean, of course there are exceptions. Of course there are great writers. Ed Sheeran is a fantastic writer, a fantastic artist, but he would have been he would have been a hit artist in 1965. Same as Amy Winehouse. There are certain exceptional people but they're very, very rooted in the tradition. They are what I would call real songwriters. But the record companies, always taking the easy option, would rather give record deals to DJs, because DJs play to 2,000 people every night and do this, So, and again, I've got nothing against the DJs. There's room for everybody, but I can't change who I am or what I am in order to kind of just fit into a business that's changed so much. It's a different thing.
And I'll say this, you're exceptionally right about the iceberg as you described it, because right now with COVID-19, I have a lot of friends that are roadies, that are, these B-list artists that if they're not playing a gig, they don't exist.
They don't exist, exactly.
I have friends in bands that I saw last summer on tour in front of 2,000 people that are currently collecting unemployment.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it, really?
It's exceptionally shocking, and you're right. When they set it up, they always looked at the top of the pyramid and they said, oh, Brian May will be okay. Oh, Elton John. Oh, Metallica. Love. Who cares, Naps? But they forgot about all the people behind.
Exactly.
And it's anyway.
And those tape operators, the guys who are there at 4 o'clock in the morning doing tape edits and going to run, running out to get sort of food for everybody in a recording session. Those guys are the ones who become the superstar producers of tomorrow because they've paid their dues and they have seen and experienced the working environment. I mean, the other thing that I really miss, God, this sounds like such a nostalgia fest, this interview. The other thing I miss is the kind of the big studios, the sense of community there used to be. If you went into A&M studios or kind of some of the great studios, there'd be 3 or 4 rooms working at the same time. So you come out for coffee and, there would be kind of Boz Scaggs in the other room, or there would be so-and-so and you get chatting. And there was this sense of community amongst the musicians. And very often you would end up singing backing vocals on someone's record, completely spontaneously because you happen to be there. Now everybody, it's sort of a case of be careful what you wish for, because everybody wished they could make records in their own bedroom. Well, now it's happening, But what is
and doing interviews in bedrooms too.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's funny because
this is the ultimate, the ultimate thing, really.
I being Canadian, I talked to a lot of the Canadian musicians, and of course Jim Vallance and stuff, and they were talking about, like what you were saying, Little Mountain Studios back in the time in Vancouver.
What a place! I
mean, I'd say, well, Jim, how do you get Lou Gramm on Foreigner on Bryan Adams' record? And they're like, well, he was recording next door.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, oh. And then
now you've got to go through 15 layers of management and PR and God knows what just for them to take your phone call, And I mean, that element of it, I think, is sad, because I always used to say, as a songwriter, if you put me in the same room with the artist, after an hour or two, we would come up with something. Either we would come up with a new song, or they would come up with they would fix on a song that I'd written that they felt they wanted to record, Whereas just sending a song to a record company, I mean, it's soul destroying. We have a Jeff Hull, who is in the band, who's an integral part member of World Goes Round, amazing talent, absolute genius, and he wrote Piano in the Dark with Brenda Russell and stuff. But because he's a quiet, self-effacing guy, I mean, he just had his heart broken by the music business so many times that in the end he quit. So this whole story of this resurrection of an album that was lost for 30 years is like discovering a buried treasure. It's a very funny thing. And just because it happened at that very momentous time, the Berlin Wall was coming down, there was all sorts of stuff going on, plus a lot of environmental consciousness had started. It wasn't the way it is now. I mean, I had come back from a trip to the Amazon and I was just completely stunned by South America and how beautiful it was. And then to find out that, kind of 50 football pitches were of forest were disappearing every hour, was just one of the most shocking kind of things. And I would start talking to people about it and their eyes would just glaze over and they go like, don't talk to me about it. Who knows? It's so far away. Why should I worry about this? And in a way, now it's the only topic of conversation, really, thanks to people like Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough. I mean, COVID-19 is nothing compared to what's coming down the track if we don't do something about the planet. And I think this is a very interesting. I deeply feel for. I think we're the lucky ones, to stay healthy, but I think this has been an amazing slap in the face for humanity. The fact that everything has just stopped, the planes aren't flying, the cars aren't going, the trains aren't going. And if you're one of the lucky ones and you're not sick, it's an amazing moment in history. I've never known anything like it. There's a sort of stillness around. It's almost like everybody's taken a couple of months sabbatical just to think, And I don't think we're going to go back to the same world that it was before. I think in many ways it will be better. I think people will start to, people are so much kinder, people are much more, they've realized that they live in a community, that they're serving one another, they're helping one another. It's not so dog eat dog. It's not so materialistic. Everybody wants money. Everybody wants to have nice things. But it had become so ridiculous, this worship of things. And it means nothing. It means bugger all if you're, excuse me, I shouldn't say that.
Well, no, you can say that, but I'll bring it back to the music industry. You look at the price. But just real quick, you look at the price of tickets, which were starting to get to be the cheapest ticket for an arena show is $150, and you go,
Basic,
come on.
Who
And
can afford?
nobody can afford it. And I think this ultimate greed that was going on is going to be readjusted by this event. I mean, there's no doubt. Nobody's going to go spend $150 on anybody after having been unemployed for 2 months, 3 months, 4, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's nice also, to get back to the environmental point, that you can now see the sky in Mumbai. You can now see the skyline. You can now see the skyline in LA. Suddenly Mexico is breathable, and you're like,
no, and within days of the lockdown happening, I mean, there were fish in the canals in Venice. You know, there was clear water. It was extraordinary, as you say, in Delhi. You know, one of the most polluted cities in the world. Someone sent me a picture because I've been going to India a lot in the last few years. I absolutely love it. And you know, Delhi was a place we would avoid just because you couldn't breathe. And now you see this beautiful blue sky everywhere. So you know, the planet can easily rebound. It's whether we're going to be here to enjoy it, you know, to be honest. It's almost like we were on a sort of a runaway train and somebody pulled the emergency brake, you know, and then everybody's running around scratching their head going, what just happened, you know? I think it's very hard to discount, you know, however many 100,000 lives it is that have been lost. But at the same time, in terms of the broad sweep of history, this is an amazing moment for everybody and an incredible opportunity to seize, you know, and to change the way we live for the better. I'm not talking about hair shirts and everybody feeling guilty about doing this, that, and the other. Just being a little more conscious and a little more kind to the person next to you and a little bit less greedy about everything. I think it's a very spiritual moment for
it is.
Whether we like it or not, it really is, you know.
It's a reset, total reset, and it's nice. And I've been following all this stuff too. But to see the dolphins in Venice, to see the sheep in these Welsh towns, and peacocks running through the streets of Dubai, you're like.
And also, you know, Brazil is a country, for example, that I have an immense amount of love and respect for. I've been there several times, and I love the music, I love the people, I love the language. But to see an idiot like Bolsonaro laughing and going on about, and it just throws into very sharp relief how out of touch these guys are with the zeitgeist, with what's going on in the world, even with his own people, let alone what's going on a global scale. So, you know, coming back to Big House and coming back to the idea of wanting to write songs that had a bit more kind of depth to them. It's not that we wanted to be kind of like deep or anything else. It's just we wanted to express ourselves. And music has always been the best songs are always the ones that express something ineffable and difficult to express in words. And yet you will take it because it's in a song. You know, you can say it in a song. And when I came back from the Amazon and we wrote Big House, I mean, it was literally, I had this image in my head because people were so dismissive of what was going on. And they thought I was literally nuts talking about this, you know. I thought, you know, this is just like, you know, a bunch of amazingly spoiled people living in a big house in LA while the rest of the city, you know, up on a hill where the rest of the city just kind of, you know, chokes on the filth and burns, and they're all kind of living it up and partying, you know, like fiddling while Rome burns, you know, like Nero, that sort of thing. Well, it's taken 30 years and we haven't done very much in the meantime to mitigate that disaster. But maybe this COVID-19 business will be the trigger that you know, for change that we want, basically. You know, and maybe what will take 50 years to change will now happen in 10. You know, I hope.
I agree.
I pray.
And we will remind folks that World Goes Round is it coming out or is it out?
The single comes on the 29th of May.
Okay.
And we are going to probably schedule another single through the summer, and then in the autumn we'll release the finished album. It's such a bonkers story. The whole thing is just so off the charts. I can't even believe how it sort of come from we were sort of one dodgy cassette away from oblivion with this album, you know, and the fact that Marty's cassette still worked after 30 years, and then Tommy remastered it, and you know, I mean, it did. I have to say, it did feel, you know, I can unashamedly say that Jeff and Tommy are two of the best musicians I've ever worked with, you know, so their sounds and Tommy's sounds are so crisp and clean, and everything sounds so kind of fresh, and, you know, they sound better now than they did then, to be honest. I don't know why that's the case, but, you know, I mean, as a songwriter, you also know something, which is that any songwriter who's worth his salt will tell you that when you write a great song, your first thought is, oh my God, where did that come from? It's like catching a fish. You know, you can't believe that this came out of you. You know, it's almost like reaching up into the ether and grabbing something that's out there and getting lucky, you know. So, but the downside of that is you don't always get the information at the right time. So, it might take. I hope I'm not like Van Gogh, where he never sold a painting during his lifetime. But I was laughing with Jeff the other day because Jeff is so disillusioned with the music business. And I said, Jeff, we're not going to be Van Gogh. Don't worry. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, and let me finish with this. "Too Much Love Will Kill You" was a song, of course, that Brian May recorded, released as a single in 1992. Just quickly talk to me about, first of all, that connection. How did you meet Ryan? Ryan, that's my son's name. Brian. How did you meet Brian? How did the song get to him? And what did you think of the final version? And, it's a nice feather in the cap to say, somebody from Queen recorded me.
Yeah, I mean, apart from David Bowie, Queen were very, very jealous and kind of reserved about recording anything from outside. So I think "Too Much Love Will Kill You" is the only song where there was a collaboration with an outside thing. I mean, it was very weird how it all happened. I mean, it's 30 years on. I'm sure I can talk about it. Brian was going through a divorce and was feeling incredibly, literally torn to pieces emotionally, because he's a very sensitive kind of guy. And, the idea that he wanted to move on to another relationship with this person that he was deeply in love with and leave his family was tearing him to bits. And anyway, his manager, who was a friend of mine, called me up and said, listen, Brian's in town and he's on his own. Could you just kind of, have a cup of tea with him? And, so anyway, Brian came up to the house and literally we were talking about it. And it's so weird because Elizabeth and I were going through a breakup as well. And even though we were sharing a house and a studio, and it suddenly became this thing that too much love will kill you. If you love too many people or whatever, this sheer kind of emotion of it. Anyway, we got through one day after about sort of endless cups of tea and endless tears. I said, Brian, we have to do something about this. So I gave him my guitar. I said, let's start writing, So we started working on this song in my studio. And Brian there's a very distinctive piano part on there, which Brian played. And, it was, at the time, though, it was just another song. For us, it was inconceivable that Queen might record it, But Elizabeth and I co-wrote it with Brian, and it was a genuine collaboration. I mean, there's even a writing tape around somewhere that someone managed to bootleg. I don't know how they got hold of it. But anyway, to cut a long story short, Brian went back to England, and then he called me up and he said, I played it to the band and they really want to cut it, but we tried recording the piano and it's just not working. We can't get the same sound. Would you mind if we used the original piano track from the demo? So I said, yeah, great. So the original analog 16 track at the time, and we upgraded to 24 eventually, but it was the original demo, was flown to London, and that is the track that features with Freddie singing it, with Roger, with Roger playing the drums to it and everything else. And of course, the really shocking thing about it was that this was about late 1987. The shocking thing was that Freddie was already very ill, and there were lots of rumors, but at the time with AIDS, it was a big stigma and a big, the press were having a field day. There were lots of insinuation and stuff. And anyway, I've learned about this obviously ex post facto, and Freddie apparently had to really, really struggle to deliver that vocal, which is still one of the most spine-chilling vocals I've ever heard on anything, let alone something of mine. But of course, there was a big problem, which is that the British tabloid press, everybody was terrified that if Freddie came out with a song called "Too Much Love Will Kill You," I leave it to you, to imagine, because Freddie was notorious for his promiscuous lifestyle. It was almost like saying, I'm dying because I've slept with too many people. It's like, and that was not what the song was meant to be about at all, ever. It was about the breakup of a relationship. But, this is the power of songs, and people make of them what they will, and they read into their own drama, their own movie, into the lyric of a song. And it works. I mean, a really great song has that kind of universality where people will write their own script to the song. And it will be so powerful and so important to them. I mean, just very briefly, I remember in the mid-'80s, we'd written a song which Carly Simon recorded called "You Have to Hurt." And I started to get letters from people who were about bereavement, And it was almost like this song was therapy for them. And I didn't know what to say, because this song had nothing to do with losing somebody, or somebody dying or anything else. And yet for them, it was absolutely real. This was the soundtrack of their tragedy, and it was absolutely vital to them. And they would write me these heartfelt letters saying, we lost our daughter, and this song was such a comfort. And I'm just going, blimey, that really does make you feel humbled in a way, because you really don't know what you're doing when you're writing a song. You're just bungling your way from letter A to letter B, hoping it makes sense at the end of it. But, music is such a powerful force. I think one thing I've learned during my lifetime is to have much more respect for music than I did. I used to think I was in a pretty disposable, pretty cheap business, but actually looking back, the way filmmakers use songs, the way advertising uses songs, is such a fundamental part of everybody's lives. Everybody professes to be a music buff and a music lover, and that's what really gets to me as well, is that it's always treated as the poor relation when it comes to rewarding the people who really do the work. As you say, the roadies, the B-list bands, the ones who create that business. It doesn't really exist anymore. Not everybody flies around in helicopters and is picked up in limos and stays in 5-star hotels. Music involves a lot of sacrifice, and
it does. And I'm telling you, some of those B-list bands, they listen. One of the B-list bands that I'm talking about, they played 1,200 seater here in Montreal. And the guys were like, oh, we haven't been in a hotel room or had a shower in 12 days because we've been sleeping on the bus. And these are not guys that are 25. These are guys that are 45, 55, and have been doing this for 25 years. And you're like, really? You haven't been off? You've been on a bus? Anyway, and by the way, that letter about bereavement is a great example of how video has changed music, because before MTV and all that, a song had a very personal connection and a personal imagery, and then after that they fed it to you, and it sort of lost a little bit of its specialness.
Listen, look, videos are extraordinary, and they are a fabulous art form in themselves, and I'm very proud of the video that my old songwriting partner Dominic has made for Big House, because he came to the thing 30 years later and he said, I've never heard this track before, I love it, let me make a video. And he gave it this incredible infusion of energy and creativity with his own imagery and his own, and I could not have wished for better, and I couldn't have done something like that myself. So I'm hesitant to criticize video, because it's a double-edged sword. You have a video like Bohemian Rhapsody, which was absolutely groundbreaking for Queen, which completely projected their image all over the world. If they weren't superstars before then, they certainly were superstars after that video. So it can be an incredibly powerful medium, but it can also be to the detriment of the song if the video doesn't, is not up to the level of the song somehow,
Absolutely. And on that, Frank, thank you. An absolute pleasure. And folks, do check out World Goes Round. The first single is Big House. More songs coming. Great slice of old meets new, I guess, right?
Certainly nothing else like it around. Listen, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mick. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I maybe we'll do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to explore with that entire discography of bands. I'm just looking at one site here where they list all your credits, and there's like 500 things, and it's like, wow, okay, Baby, Sheena Easton, and it just goes on, and here, look at that. Diane Richard, Randy Crawford, Jungo Yagami, Air Supply. It just goes on and on.
I know, it's crazy. Well, I'm one of the lucky ones. I managed to make a living out of something that I love, and I always say I would have done it for free, So
don't tell them that. Spotify heard you.
It's too late now.
Spotify's listening.
I was lucky, and I was working at a time when it was possible to make a living if you were successful. I do really feel for what Desmond Child. Desmond's fine. Don't worry about him. But he's written some fantastic hits in his life, and for him to say that he had a massive hit and made $3,000 out of it is an absolute scandal. If people know what goes into making a hit record, and it's also a question of, it's a bit like everything else, who's actually making the money. That's the annoying thing. The record companies are still. They've managed to sort of find themselves in a situation where they're making a fortune because they've got these 360-degree deals, on the strength of the fact that there's no back catalog. And they always say, hey, now we have to own the artist's merchandising rights, we have to own their publishing, we have to own this, we have to own that. So, and musicians, honestly, we're not all stupid, but they just want to make music. That's the point. It's a passion-driven thing. If you don't have that passion, you shouldn't be making music. And I long for the days when there were real music men around who weren't necessarily musicians, but people like Clive Davis, those kind of people who just absolutely loved the songs. You know, the song was the key to everything. You look at his credits, you know, from everywhere from Bette Midler to Bruce Springsteen or whatever, and you realize that those key figures they're also lacking in the record companies, and maybe they should take a good look at themselves and start to try and promote through the ranks some people who really do know about music and have a love for it, you know.
Oh, it's the whole game has changed. But anyway, on that, as we say, say in Montreal, merci, monsieur. Thank you so much.
C'était mon plaisir.
Perfect.
See you soon.